Welcome to Church at Home. I'm Father Dominic.
Brother Michael.
Father Ed.
And we're here to talk about, as always, the Scriptures. And this Sunday is going to be 19th Sunday of Ordinary Time. And this one's a fun one that we're all somewhat used to. Peter, trying to walk on water amid the storm.
So we also have treated in the Old Testament to another famous guy, Elijah, and he's relating to a storm because remember he went up the mountain and he was looking for a revelation of God, and so the storm came, thunder, lightning, the rocks, earthquake, all that kind of stuff, and so God wasn't in the storm, but he was in the small whispering voice. So now we have Peter on the water, and so Peter saw Jesus in the storm and trusted him and did his thing, and then suddenly he stopped seeing Jesus where Jesus was and got frightened and failed. So
I think we see in Elijah's story, he's expecting God in I think you said the magnificent, right? In the grand stuff, the violence, the loud thing, the big thing, the grandiose. And that's not where God was. Elijah found him in the quiet whisper, like in a gentle breeze. And then Peter, in the gospel story, is called out of the boat, of course, by Jesus, who is in the storm. And while he has that faith and he's paying attention to Jesus, it works, but sort of in the same way that Elijah was distracted by his assumption that God's going to be in the grandiose, Peter gets likewise distracted by the storm. And when he starts to look at other things and is fascinated by what is not God, he slips, he falls, and that's when he literally becomes a part. He falls into the storm as he takes his eyes off of Jesus and is distracted by everything that was around him, which was albeit a dangerous thing, the storm, but as you guys have said, right, Jesus, God, is in the storm, so there's no reason to be afraid.
Right. And of course, that's what Jesus says to Peter, which always offends all of us. And why were you afraid? And we're like, are you kidding me? Why weren't you afraid? And so Jesus said, well, you have such little faith. So then we went, wow, that ouch, number two. So I don't know. I'm thinking that that is the challenge of faith for us in our daily lives, maybe, is when life is stormy. And I don't know about you, but mine seems to, you ever hear about tempest in a teapot? My little world. So a lot of storms come up, at least on the inside. And I think, maybe I'm not like the rest of humanity, but I think my temptation is to wonder why God has abandoned me in these various storms of life. Even when the storm is caused by my own stupidity and that kind of stuff, I still am tempted, I think, to think, why does God permit this? Why am I? So maybe in your life you've had the same experience, and maybe today we can hear Jesus saying, wait a minute, why are you of such little faith? I am in the storm. So
I like how you said sometimes the storm is within me. And that's a great reflection, because we often think about difficult situations, struggles in the family, something goes wrong at work, or we're struggling externally. And so God is in that storm, but often it's an unseen storm. It's a spiritual storm within us. Our own struggles, doubts, fears, spiritual desolations. Sometimes that storm is in us, be it grief or anything.
Right. Loneliness.
But the same struggle with sin, all of that. But the same thing, God is right there. Jesus is in that storm.
Right.
And and these storms are loud and they can really command our attention. And as a allegory of the struggles of our life, I often hear the people struggling with, well, Father, this terrible thing happened to me or my family. How can we believe in a God to allow us to do that? And yeah, it's really difficult. I recently was talking to a woman whose granddaughter passed away, 5 months old, and so her whole family's just rocked by that. And while God didn't cause that, that's a difficulty that they need to go through. And the noise and the disruption and the chaos of life can distract us or can really rock our faith. But it is in those quiet moments of being attentive to God that He'll lead us through, and He'll, in that chaos, will allow us to give us some sort of direction, meaning, purpose, and hopefully some way out of the storm.
Right. Yeah, it's probably the fundamentals of faith. I don't know, maybe is that if we cannot see Jesus in the storm, then, who needs to see Jesus on a sunny day? You know what I mean? You can be joyful and at peace and in comfort just by the warmth of the sun, etc.
Jesus is in Cleveland too.
Yeah, right. Right. So, I think this is a fundamental of our spiritual lives, is that, and it's also our theology of suffering, right? The cross. So when we get to the Lenten time, especially in the Passion of our Lord, all the people walked away from that gruesome, painful experience, except for the Blessed Virgin Mary and evidently John, the beloved disciple. Everybody walked away shaking their heads, saying, well, this isn't God. There's no God in this here. Nothing to see here, people. Go home, and that's the crisis of faith, it seems to me. And the atheists use it against religious people all the time. How could this good God of yours allow babies to die and children to suffer and, sex abuse and all that kind of stuff? And I think, those are the times when I have to dig deepest and to be reminded that Jesus is with me in it, in the pain, in the crucifixion, and it's the doorway to experiencing grace and resurrection. But it's a challenge, and we need to pray and rely upon the grace of God, sacraments, and of course our life in the church. The wisdom, as Father was saying, the wisdom of other people who have managed through storms. That's why, like AA and grief support groups and friendships and spiritual soul friending is all important. You got to check with the people who've been there and done it. Oftentimes to be encouraged to keep going.
And after the storm, the hope is that we'll be able to embrace, God's glory and goodness in the wonderful weather. Just like, hopefully tomorrow we get some sunshine.
Yeah, it's a gloomy day in Cleveland today for those of you that might be watching from some distant place. What was that thing? There's got to be a morning after. That was remember the wave? The tidal wave came and flipped the boat upside down and all that kind of stuff. It was a disaster movie back in the 80s.
Oh.
And the woman came with the song. I know. He wasn't even around in the 1980s. He was with the Angels. Isn't that the song? There's got to be a morning after.
Yes.
Maybe he wasn't around in the 80s either.
We'll flip through the record files.
So go on to Spotify and look for Morning After. You're going to be happy about it. All right. Take care.
God bless.
Thanks.